It might seem odd to raise the subject of happiness in the middle of a major pandemic, but the subject has been on my mind one way or another during the distresses and deprivations of 2020. There is a huge vogue for happiness, of course, and much advice out there for those of us who would like to be happier. And what's not to like about that? No one is ever unhappy about being happy, but there are perhaps good reasons in not putting too high a premium on our own happiness. The most obvious reason, perhaps, is that if my happiness is to be obtained only at the expense of someone else's, this is always the case in an overtly competitive situation, of course. Even those of us who want to keep most of the people happy most of the time will fail when it comes to running an appointment process. The disappointment of all but one candidate is the price that has to be paid if we are to give everyone a chance. Disappointment and happiness don't really go together, of course. And it's for this reason that people sometimes seek to preserve their own happiness by managing their expectations. We've probably all done this. Don't expect too much, and you won't be too disappointed. There's a lot to be said in favour of having realistic expectations, but I wonder whether expectation management is really a way of generating happiness. As I reflect on it, it seems to me that while I can be very unhappy when some expectations are not fulfilled, it's sometimes, perhaps often the case that the fulfilling of expectations excites in me not happiness, but boredom. I expect to have scrambled egg on toast. I have scrambled egg on toast. Well, life is okay and could certainly be worse, but I don't necessarily consider myself to be a happy person. Of course, other expectations could have transformed the scrambled eggs experience. But it could go either way. Had I expected to have nothing for tea, then scrambled egg might have really cheered me up. If, on the other hand, I'd expected a 3-course dinner with wine, then the fluffy golden egg and the crispy toasted bread might not be quite as pleasing. And yet again, if I go through life with my expectations aimed low, then I will never have the happy experience of realising that I could, after all, do something special or exceptional or particularly worthwhile. Such happiness can't be guaranteed any more than getting the job that 30 or 300 other people have applied for can be guaranteed. But maybe that's part of the joy of happiness, that it can never be guaranteed, or programmed, or controlled. I don't want to suggest that expectations are irrelevant to happiness, but I'm sceptical that generating what we might call Goldilocks expectations, neither too high nor too low, can lead to happiness. On the contrary, it seems more than likely to lead to a rather dull life, characterised by scrambled eggs, not only on toast, but on repeat. It seems to me that the key to happiness, if there can be such a thing, might be found not in expectations, but in acceptance. Acceptance is a response and works retrospectively, whereas expectation is forward-looking. And my hunch is that happiness is found in the way in which we respond, not the way we expect or anticipate or indeed try to control. There is a danger in talking about acceptance, of course, and that is of drifting into the territory of acquiescence. Acquiescence is like acceptance, but belongs alongside words with a moral hue like complicity and complacency. Acceptance, in the sense I'm meaning it, is not a deliberate disregard of things that are wrong, bad, or corrosive, but an appreciation that there are some things that are difficult, inconvenient, or bad that I really can't do anything about. These are the realities that we just have to suck up. Acceptance can be a step towards happiness to the extent to which it is a wise attunement to reality. We're in the territory here of the famous so-called serenity prayer. The first form of this was written in the 1930s by Reinhold Niebuhr, but a modified version has become a key part of the various 12-step programs that are so extraordinarily helpful to people living with addiction. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. It's a prayer in which every line counts, But the one that has the greatest impact on our happiness is perhaps the last one, the wisdom to know the difference. The difference, that is, between what can and should be changed and what really needs to be accepted. Such wisdom is often hard won. A bereaved person will struggle with acceptance. It takes time for the reality of loss to sink in, and as it does so, the bereaved person will sometimes find themselves in the unhappy state of raging against that which cannot be changed. This is an extreme example, but there are plenty of times in our life when our spirit will chafe against reality, wishing various things simply were not so. The main problem with happiness as a goal is perhaps not the most obvious one, that if we pursue it too narcissistically, we will rob others of the chance of being happy, but something rather subtler. It's that if we are impatient for happiness, if we want to be happy too soon or for too much of the time, we will fail to do the apparently negative, miserable and uncongenial work that might in time create the conditions of happiness in the future. To do the work, that is, of acceptance. Of course, you can overdo that argument too. Delayed gratification can be appropriate, but infinitely delayed gratification is probably a serious life mistake. Nonetheless, the question of time and timing is important when considering happiness, and seasons of unhappiness might indeed be important as well as inevitable in a happy life. So maybe we could put it like this: the question of happiness is not so much a question of finding the shortest route from where I am now to the happiness I crave, but of working out what my unhappiness demands of me. In other words, the desire for happiness might be helpful to us in times of difficulty and distress if it is met by a wise discernment, the wisdom to know the difference between times when the work of acceptance is needed and those when the work of change-making is required. There is a time and a place for both, but the take-home point is that both involve effort and work. Acceptance may seem nothing more than an exercise in passivity, but you know that it isn't when your life is marked by deep disappointment, tragic loss, or traumatic harm that cannot be altered. The worst sort of unhappiness is that in which we get stuck and that becomes chronic, generating a cycle of negativity that feeds on itself, distorting perception, undermining relationships and generating more and more misery. When overtaken by unhappiness of this sort, we may well need professional help to break the cycle. But there are other forms of unhappiness that really are part of the process, that are realistic responses to unpleasant realities. We shouldn't pathologize these or even seek to avoid them. It's inevitable that we long to be happy, but inevitable too that we are often not happy. The paradox here is that it is by letting go of our disappointment and frustrations and responding constructively to unhappiness that we might just find ourselves becoming happier than we ever imagined we could be.